Hello and welcome to FI for Kids, the podcast about guiding your kids on the path to financial independence and extraordinary lives. I'm your host, Dominic DeLaquil. Our guest today is City Council member and Vice President Liz Strader. Liz was born and raised in Southwest Idaho and currently serves on the Meridian, Idaho City Council. Her journey from growing up in the Mountain West to her current career in public service includes a career in finance in New York City, working while attending NYU, investing in startup businesses, and also raising a family. We have a lot of interesting topics to discuss, so we're just going to dive right into it. Welcome, Liz, and thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, Dominic. Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So why don't we start with your background? What did you learn about money from your parents when you were growing up?
Well, my parents, I think, were, a middle-class family, pretty normal family. We didn't really talk about money very much. It was just kind of, not kind of considered a super polite conversation to have at the time.
Yep.
And I don't think that was intentional or anything. It just didn't come up that much. But one thing I remember my father telling me that he had started saving for his retirement since he had started working at like 14. And I remember hearing that from him as a kid and thinking, oh, wow, this sounds like a really important thing I need to figure out one day.
Uh-huh.
I've always been drawn to like all of the theme of my career. It's like these topics that people don't really consider part of polite conversation, like finance, politics. My faith is important to me, all of the things you're sort of not usually going to talk about with strangers, at least, have been things I've gravitated toward. It's kind of an interesting theme about my career. But yeah, I mean, growing up, it wasn't something we talked about a lot. I just knew it was important. And I kind of had to figure it out, after I left the house.
So did you get a sense, so you didn't talk about it much, did you, other than your dad sort of mentioning he started saving for retirement when he was 14, did you get any sort of a sense just from observation about how your parents felt about money? Was it kind of scarce? Were they tense about it? Was it just, it seemed fine? Was it?
My parents are interesting. They've always had a really strong marriage, and I think they had a lot of like the really serious discussions kind of amongst themselves, right?
Yeah.
With the two of them. I feel really grateful. Like I didn't hear them fighting about money a lot, but I also didn't hear a lot of the discussions. So I could kind of start to formulate like my own philosophy or thoughts around it. I do know, that they have always been big planners, and they've always been very intentional about like if they were going to help with college, for example, they would kind of explain, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're prepared to pay for like, in-state tuition at Boise State University. If you want to do something else, that's kind of on you and you can figure that out.
Mm-hmm.
They were good about setting those kinds of boundaries with their kids. And I think that did us all a favor.
Yeah, your parents actually
Yeah.
sound similar to my parents in a lot of ways. Like we didn't talk about money very much. And I've talked to some people on the show, and they kind of had a sense of things from their parents. Sometimes it was just a scarcity mindset, and it took them a long time to work their way out of it. I didn't really have that. They didn't talk about money a lot. I knew that they were just had the sense they were on top of things. They were careful with their money, but I never had the sense that there was a lack, and they were good planners. I had similar sort of experiences with they explained how they were going to help with college, and if I wanted to do other stuff, then that was on me. So which again I think was helpful. So that's interesting that there's just coincidentally there's, to me at
Yeah.
least, sounds like there's some similarities there.
Yeah, definitely.
So then you went to college in Idaho. Well, what was your first degree? I'm assuming it was another degree that you were working on in New
Yeah.
York, but so what was your degree in Idaho?
Sure. Yeah. I went to Boise State University for a year, and then I transferred to College of Idaho because I wanted to be on their debate team. That was kind of my obsession with college, was being on the college debate team. I don't know that I was very thoughtful about my major. I was a psychology major, and my guidance counselor advisor person in college, Professor Thurer, pulled me aside and said, when I was close to graduation actually, and said, listen, you should not become a therapist. You don't have the right personality for that. You should go into business. I think that'll end up working out better for you.
Hmm.
And I really appreciated that. I mean, I think he was right. I still use psychology all the time. Like, I think it's a really great field. I mean, I was drawn to it just because I was fascinated with people and how they work through things and process through things. But yeah, I was a psychology major and had no background actually in accounting or anything like that. But I kind of fell into finance and actually decided to pursue a career in finance because a really great friend of mine, my old debate partner, lived in New York and seemed like he had a really interesting job. And the more I talked to him about it, the more fascinated I was. And I ended up interviewing with it's a company called Société Générale. It's a French investment bank, and took a role with them. But it was before the Great Recession. It was like back when you could kind of stumble into something like that, and it was just a great fit for me actually. And I never expected that, but it was really cool that I kind of found that.
So what did you like about it?
Yeah, I think there's something a little bit magical about money in a way. It
Sure.
kind of has the power to fuel businesses, help companies succeed or fail, how they deal with it. It's very impactful. And I kind of felt like, especially because I didn't have a lot of background in it, as I was teaching myself and learning and training in capital markets, I started to learn about, the power of leverage, the power of compound interest, just all of these different concepts. And it was like opening my eyes. Oh, I see a different kind of thing in the world that helps it run is capital. And so I've been a big capital markets person. That's kind of my professional background, is specifically in the loan syndication world, which is a part of the industry where people are buying and selling very large loans. That became my specialty, was structuring and selling those types of transactions.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing with money is it touches so many aspects or all aspects of our lives. And it's such a valuable tool if you know how to make it work for you, whether that's you're a business. Obviously, large businesses, for the most part, know how to do that. And they've got people that have been involved in that in lots of ways. But, so much of the economy is driven by small businesses. Having been an entrepreneur myself and I actually had a restaurant in Boise for about 5 years. And I wish that I would have known more about money before I did that because I was undercapitalized. And it was a lot tighter than it should have been. And then when 2008 happened, right, and the recession happened, like that, I wasn't able to weather it and stay afloat. Been better with my money and known more about money beforehand, right, had better financial literacy, that might have had a totally different outcome. So
Yeah.
that's on the small business side. And also just on the individual side, if people understand their money and if they can understand it at a younger age and learn how to make it work for them, it just sets you up with so many more opportunities and so much more flexibility as you go through life. So
Yeah. Oh, you're spot on with that. I mean, I think it's fascinating because it's a tool. And I think the people that can see money as a tool end up doing a lot better just in terms of, how they balance everything, their prioritization in life. Money is a tool. To me, it should not be the goal in and of itself. It should
right.
be what you use to kind of facilitate your walk through life, your priorities, your values, your legacy. I mean, there's a lot that you can use it for. But I'll never forget, I mean, just a funny anecdote from Wall Street. I once heard I won't say who, but a very high level executive, a person who was on, the private jet type of person, who was complaining that he couldn't retire. And I thought, and I had a sense of how much money this person made. It was at a different level in the organization. And I just remembered thinking, whoa, if he can't get that figured out, that really says something. And it really got me thinking, because there's a time in your career where you're just kind of grinding it out and you're doing as much work as you possibly can, right,
Yeah.
right, to try to get ahead and help your family. And then you do reach a point where you start to like surface a little bit and look around and go, okay, what are my plans like when I try to get, to that stage of my life? And I stumbled on the Mr. Money Mustache blog
Yeah. Uh-huh.
in the middle of my career. And it was like a life-changing thing that I stumbled on that blog actually, because I liked my job, but I wanted to have a lot more freedom. And finding out that there was like a mathematical formula for achieving financial independence and that you can actually generate a goal to do that was life changing. I wouldn't say that I ever quite reached like that destination, but I'm on that path. And, you know, having found kind of that thought process and just the FI kind of space generally was really life changing for me.
Yeah, I
It helped
think
a
that's
lot.
true for so many people. I mean, it certainly has been true for me. And I think I say this on the show all the time. That's one of the whole focuses of FI is you were talking about, well, money's just a tool. And then you gave that example of that executive who was in the private jet phase, feels like they can't retire. It's like, then you're missing out on one of the key components, and you touched on this, which is knowing what you want out of life, knowing what you value. So you're making optimal decisions for you about where to spend your money and where not, right? So
Right.
that I mean, that's crazy to me. And I know that that's not uncommon, right? That, there are people who seemingly are making a ton of money and are still living paycheck to paycheck and feel like they're trapped there, even though they might be making a lot of money because they're just spending it. And somehow I don't know whether they're trying to keep up with the Joneses or they just feel like that's what they're supposed to do, or again, we're back to like maybe they just don't understand. But you can have a life if you know what really matters to you, that is a fulfilling, joyful life, and still have money left over that then you're investing. Just that's how you're making money into that tool to make it work for you rather than you just becoming a slave then to that money.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I call it the hamster wheel, right? But it's like, there is that kind of hedonic treadmill effect that I think it can affect anyone in
Yeah.
our society. I know our society and culture kind of discussion is for later, but I do see that a lot. It's it's interesting because yeah, I feel like, when I first started out, when I moved to New York, I had just gotten married. We literally like got married, went on our honeymoon, moved to New York. We thought like in Idaho, we thought, oh, we'll just drive up to like an apartment building and we'll just ask for an application, like we were these kids from Idaho. We
Yeah.
just had no understanding of what things were like in Brooklyn, where we ended up living, and that we had to get a broker, and just we went through quite a learning process, through our early marriage years. And this whole time, yeah, it's interesting just that these conversations about money, got weaved in different times. Sometimes it was stressful, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it was trying to save really hard for a big goal, like
Yeah.
buying our first house, things like that. But sometimes it was also just, yeah, reflecting on other people around us, like in that example, and kind of going, okay, if even somebody in that position can't figure it out, there really must be some secret to this that we really need to focus on learning.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, figuring out what your real priorities are, I think, is one of the best things people can do. I talk to my kids about that a lot.
Yeah, so let's talk about your kids. So you've got some kids. So what are you teaching them about money? And well, and since you brought that up, and how are you combining that with teaching them about identifying what it is that matters to them?
Yeah. Oh, sure. Well, okay. So I have four children, and I have two that are a little older, that are tween kind of ages, and then I have two that are toddlers. So, the younger ones we're not worried about right now, but the
Sure.
the older ones, we've been through every kind of version of school you can imagine. We've done public school, we've done charter school, we've done homeschool, which I really love, and I'm passionate about homeschooling my kids. We've done dual enrollment. you name it. But I kind of felt like having more structured conversations, starting in like third and fourth grade was a good starting point. And, the Choose FI Foundation actually has a really decent financial literacy curriculum for different age groups. And I've used that curriculum with my kids and had good success with it. It's led to good conversations, just basic things, tracking a very, very basic concept of a budget for like a kid, talking about how much college costs. We did a research project around that this year and really enjoyed that. And yeah, just I even had them interview people. I had them interview different family members and different friends to hear about how they budget and what they do,
Yeah,
because
that's a
it's good
great
for them to
idea.
understand the variety. And I just think it's good for them to get like a well-rounded idea, all of the things that can come up in.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Are you doing anything with them in terms of teaching them about investing or having them teaching them about the importance of saving a certain amount of what they have coming in and starting to create those habits early? Or where are you with those kind of things?
Yeah, for us, the biggest conversation has been around compounding.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So compound interest, but that same concept, right, extends into almost everything because it extends into investment returns, compounding. It extends into what happens to you if you don't pay a credit card bill and then
Yeah.
interest starts to accrue. And it's actually, you're looking at potentially, if you don't take care of something like that, you're looking at the reverse of that, right? So we talk about that concept a lot. We do fun little games, like we'll put a couple of jelly beans in a cup before the weekend starts and we'll say, okay, we're doing a compound interest exercise, so you can eat your jelly beans, but if you save some jelly beans, then they're going to accrue interest, and then
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
maybe put some Smarties in there or something to kind of represent that. So we do try to do things like that. I think when it comes to investments, we're just starting to kind of have those conversations. I think when they're teens, it'll be a great time to
Yeah.
talk about.
Well, it sounds like you're laying the groundwork, though. If you're talking a lot
Okay.
about compounding, sort of good and bad interest, then you're laying the groundwork for investment. So that's cool. That's good.
Yeah, yeah, we do. We like to talk about that. We also like to talk about not just the importance of saving, but also the importance of giving too
Yeah.
along the way. But how it's important to give within your means. Like we talk about things like that too. Yeah, I just want them to have a really well-rounded, kind of idea of the financial world. It's much better, I think, to try to learn these lessons now with a little bit of intellectual grounding and everything before you hit the real world and you're out of the house. And, pretty soon you've got every now and then you're going to get yourself into some kind of muck and you got to dig yourself out.
Right.
So
Right.
it's good for them to kind of have these concepts down, I think, early, maybe avoid some of the harder lessons that I'm sure we've all learned over the years.
I mean, and like you said, right, they'll go through some of those things because we all do at one point or another. But one of the things that I think is really beneficial and important for parents to start talking about their kids in whatever way they're approaching it about money from a younger age is now they're comfortable talking about it with you, right? They've got some understanding. So when they get out on their own and they realize, oh, I've kind of made some mistakes, they already know they can come to you and talk about it. And then you can help them figure out what their options are to dig themselves out of whatever muck they've gotten themselves in, as you put it. So I think that's
Yeah.
actually really important. I mean, it's kind of a long-term thing, but so much of parenting is a long-term practice, and you're setting things in place and you're trying to teach certain things or plant seeds that you're hoping then are going to, sprout later on. So
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Like I remember when I first, went off to college and kind of left the nest, and I was so stubborn. I did not want to admit if I was having trouble to my parents. Like I really did not want to ask them for help if I did not absolutely need to. I
mhm.
was so, yeah, just very stubborn about some things like that. And I, in hindsight, think like if I had just made a couple more phone calls to my father and my mom and asked them, for some at least good advice about how to handle some of those challenges, it would have been much better. But it's okay. I mean, I think you're right. It's communication, and I think with your kids and opening the door, but also having them understand like this is a big space, like this is a big topic. And there have been bills passed in the legislature to try to bring it into school classrooms and stuff now to a greater degree in Idaho. But at least when I was growing up, like personal finance was not something you really learned in school. And I think it set a lot of people up where, if you can start now with your kids and start talking about this stuff, I think it just helps them so much.
Yeah. Yep. I agree completely. Before I move on to the next thing I want to talk to you about, I just want to ask if you are, since you brought up kind of giving your kids examples, right, of people that are struggling. Are you familiar with the Singleton Foundation for Financial Literacy and Entrepreneurship at all?
No, I'm not.
We just did an episode with them a couple episodes ago, and they've got some really cool stuff going on. And they've got four different main programs. And one of those is a program called Million Stories. And they've got about 30 different original shows that they're all short form. So they're all about 10 minutes or less. And I can't think of the name because there's so many, but I know that there's one that focuses on a couple of them actually that focus on people that are struggling. Some of them are kind of more geared towards entrepreneurship and businesses that are struggling or that have failed, and they talk through that with people. But they also have some on there where they just talk with couples or individuals about sort of things they're struggling with. So you might find good examples there, and anyone else who's listening, but since you're already doing that, you might be able to find some examples from Million Stories. So you can find all their programs at singletonfoundation.org, but also each of their main programs has its own website. Million Stories, I think, is just millionstories.com.
Yeah, I'm gonna write that down. That's great. I mean, I'm always looking for examples that are gonna like land with my kids. Like I think it's very helpful.
They've
So
got a ton of great content, and their whole thing is they're using the power of entertainment and storytelling to try and help people with financial literacy and understanding entrepreneurship, because in their mind, and I think this is true, actually I agree with this, that they're connected, right? Entrepreneurship, because if you're wanting to be an entrepreneur, you have that creative spark, then you've got to learn about business and how finances work, and then that carries over anyway. But they're doing some really cool stuff. I think they're worth checking out.
that's awesome. Yeah, there's another one. There's a place called the Simple Startup. That I've also they have a curriculum too that I'm planning to do over the summer with my kiddos where they can kind of learn how to start their own little business. I couldn't agree more. Like it's all interconnected. Yeah, I mean no matter who you are, to some extent in our society, you're impacted by our economic system, by how we do these things, and you have to deal with it one way or another. You can deal with it head on and proactively, or you cannot deal with it, but no matter what, you will eventually be dealing with it.
Yep.
Reality hits you in the face one way or another. But even if you're dreaming big, it's like if you want to make a business happen, like in your example with your restaurant, that is such a huge undertaking, and having the skills, to be successful financially is like critical.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
yeah.
Today's episode is sponsored by Venture Valley, a Singleton Foundation program. Venture Valley is an esports style video game. It's multiplayer. It's based around business creation, so it's fun to play and compete, but you also learn business and financial basics while you're playing. You can find Venture Valley at venturevalleygame.com. I'll put a link for that in the show notes. And thanks to Venture Valley and the Singleton Foundation for Financial Literacy and Entrepreneurship for sponsoring this episode. So let's move on just a little bit. So you have a career now in politics, public service, right? Working at a very local level, right? City council. So what drew you to that career in public service and serving the community?
Yeah. Well, part of it was, again, that kind of funny story about the Mr. Money Mustache website. My husband and I, both being from Idaho, we missed it. Like we wanted to be around family. We wanted to raise our kids back home. And New York is great, but New York is it's just a pressure cooker, kind of a place to raise kiddos. A lot of people are very successful in New York raising kids, but it can be kind of stressful, especially without that whole village around you, helping you with raising your kids. So
Sure.
we wanted to get back home. And so when I kind of knew, okay, my goals are to get back home, and my goal is to save enough that I can just kind of end up in a spot where I could do something that I just feel really good about with my job for a couple of years. I actually only planned to run once for city council. I never thought I would run for a second term, but I love it. I just get so much joy from it. It's a very it's an interesting role because it's not a volunteer role, it's a paid role, but at the same time it's not going to pay too much. It's just something that I felt like I could help my city because I had some of the main skills I thought that were really needed for Meridian. I had a lot of background in capital markets and commercial real estate. Specifically, I had become a managing director of a group at a large commercial bank that structured and syndicated commercial real estate and healthcare real estate transactions. So I had a lot of background in that. When I went to NYU, it was all around commercial real estate stuff. And I looked at the city and I sort of said, wow, the biggest things going on in the city of Meridian are this huge amount of growth that needs to be channeled in a very deliberate direction. And then the main things that city councilors do are really land use and budgeting. And I felt like this is something I could help with. I felt like it would be an opportunity to just, take some time, give back to my community, do something I felt good about that was totally different. That's the main thing I wanted. I was just really craving something completely different than what I had been doing. And it's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done in my life. Like I've really
cool.
loved it.
So now what are you thinking down the line? Are you now thinking about trying to maybe expand that in terms of public service or politics, maybe a mayoral run, or are you not sure and you'll just switch to something else
I don't
again?
know. It's really hard to say. It's funny. I think about these things a lot, and it really just depends on it's a family decision for us, like,
Sure.
where we go with things. My husband is actually a stay-at-home father for many years when my career was totally nuts and I was
Yeah,
traveling a lot and working
sure.
long hours. And he did a phenomenal job. And we've always tried to treat it like a team.
Yeah.
And we always wanted to have one person that was more flexible. So right now I'm the flexible person. And I guess we always have the ability to change that if we decide to, but it's kind of an ongoing conversation. But yeah, I have a lot of interests. So besides my work on the city council, I'm also on the board of a startup company in the financial services space that it's called Hashlinks. I can probably say that. And it uses blockchain and other smart contracts and stuff to try to um, reduce the settlement times of commercial loans. And so that's been a big passion project for me. So I'm kind of one of those people that I jump around a lot, and if I'm most happy when I have a lot of different projects going at one time.
Hmm.
So I'm
So
always getting new projects. My main thing, though, that I do want to do is the city of Meridian has a lot of amazing things going for it and has a lot of challenges,
yeah,
and including with all the inflation that we've seen, with some pressures in our budget and stuff. It's like really, really important to me to help the city make sure that we're keeping the level of service that's needed
yeah,
to support a growing community, especially when it comes to public safety. So, like, I am really into the city budget, the long-term city financial plan. I'm leading a lot of meetings around that right now. So, yeah, it's a huge passion for me just to try to make sure that our city continues to be financially in a really strong position.
yeah. Well, that's just really cool. That's cool from a couple different points of view. So obviously, just for you personally, something you're interested in, and you've got some background that makes that helpful. I'm sure you're learning a ton as you're going, which is also always fun. But also just the idea that you learned enough from a combination of things, really, right? Some of it, from Mr. Money Mustache, and, you're familiar with Choose FI. So you're familiar with the FI world, your time in finance, seeing some people that were making a ton of money and still not managing it maybe so great. And so
Yeah.
you've put yourself as a family, right? As a team in a position where you can do this public service and you're getting paid, but again, you said not a ton, right? It's not, you're not getting rich from being a city council member. So, but then you're able to do something that is important and fulfilling for you, important for the community as a whole, and then also learning a ton. I mean, so I think, right? So for parents that are trying to guide their kids on the path to FI, this is one of those things that if you teach your kids about money when they're younger and they put themselves on a good financial path, as they go through their journey through life, if public service is something that becomes important to them, or even if that's just they want to do nonprofit stuff, but the money is less, but they put themselves in a good financial situation, that just gives them more flexibility and opportunity to do those kind of things that are rewarding for them and also good for society as a whole. So I think that's cool.
Yeah, I do too. I think what's really fun is like just watching people be able to, yeah, make their dreams come true through planning, right? Through plan. It's not easy, just like having to be disciplined and planning for the long term, but it's great watching that come together. And yeah, thanks for saying that. Yeah, that's a nice thing to say. I can say like I feel so lucky,
Yeah.
that yeah, like honestly, if I hadn't found that blog, I think I would have eventually probably gotten to the same place, but it accelerated a lot of my learning in finding those resources. And I definitely want my kids to have access to the same resources, so that they're able to, yeah, figure out how to make their dreams come true, how to do special things for their community, how to feel secure, but also to know when they have enough, right?
Yeah. Right.
Like when enough is enough and when they're happy and they're able to just really enjoy special times in their life with their family, all of that really is a big deal.
Yeah,
um
because it's really, if you're just pursuing money just for the sake of money, or you haven't identified what really matters to you and what's enough, then you find yourself just perpetually pursuing it. And then you become trapped. Instead of money then being this tool that frees you and gives you more flexibility and more opportunity, it becomes then a trap and you become handcuffed to it. And you're now finding that you have less opportunity, less flexibility, less joy in your life rather than more. So finding that right balance for you and knowing yourself. I mean, you have to know sort of practical money things, but that's the easy part, really. Like that's pretty straightforward and easy to learn if you know I need to learn this stuff. But this journey of understanding yourself and knowing yourself and then combining those two is really where it's at. And then you create this situation for yourself where you can do things like where what you're doing, and then you just get a lot of fulfillment out of that. And it just brings you, I'm sure, in contact with all sorts of other people out there. And some, I'm sure, right, doing working, on the city council. Sometimes that can be frustrating, but there also have to be people that you've come into contact with where it's like, wow, they were really cool, or I learned a lot, or wow, that's cool what those people are doing, or that business is doing. I never knew anything about that. And that stuff
yeah.
to me is all really exciting. And I think as parents, right, you would want those kind of opportunities for your kids as they become adults and really sort of take off on their own.
Yeah, it's cool. Like in the city of Meridian, I come in contact with a lot of different groups. And like one example I like to give, we had a presentation to the city council by the Meridian Youth Baseball Group. We have actually in Meridian one of, I think maybe one of, if not the largest volunteer youth baseball organizations in the US. It's incredible what these folks are doing. And that is an entirely volunteer driven organization, and seeing what they've accomplished, it's incredible. And it's something that, I think they're doing a better job even than a business necessarily would. But those people found the time and the capacity and the bandwidth to go pursue something really important and build something amazing for not just their kids, but for other kids. And like, I just love, yeah, being in public service, you get to encounter so many groups like this. And it's really special just learning about all of the fabulous people that are doing phenomenal projects from their heart in your city. and having the time to like really get to know people like that, it's a really special thing for sure. It's hard to describe like just how I'm just like blown away by people all the time,
Yeah.
like and the stuff that they're working on in the city. It's really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I would
That
have
is
never
cool.
had this chance, to do this. If I had just been doing my 9 to 5 thing and hadn't thought about changing things, doing things a different way, I don't know if I would have had that chance. So I think it's really special. I feel grateful. And part of it too is, yeah, we do sometimes, yeah, we hear from people that are not happy, right?
Sure.
Like that is part of that job too. But I don't mind that. I like to hear from my neighbors. We moved into having city council districts now. So each city council member, instead of being citywide, now we each have a district. But even that change, that's been really cool. It's been great to like really dig in and, you know, I care a lot about just trying to make sure that we're keeping the quality of life where it needs to be. But when people are upset about things, like I was on the city council through COVID, and people had a lot of things to talk about there. And I always really wanted to listen to people deeply and take the time and understand what they're facing and what they're really going through. So yeah, it's a special role. I recommend to anyone, if you get to a point in your life where you can just either take some time to do public service, or even if you're, doing it when you retire. I know some people that have done it when they've retired too. And I recommend that anyone that has any interest in that take a look at it, because we all really benefit when people are engaged and they want to serve the public. It's a great thing to see.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Great advice. At whatever point they're at in their lives, if they've got any interest at all, I think that's great. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
Before we talk about financial literacy on a societal level, I want to back up for a second just because you mentioned something and I thought, oh, I want to ask you about that and take a couple of minutes and talk about blockchain and what blockchain is. Only because I've heard of it and I've like, oh, I need to like explore that more and I haven't. And so
Yeah.
I'm assuming there are other people out there that are in a similar boat. So just explain that for just a couple of minutes and then we'll get into the other stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm probably not the best expert on it, but and I will say, at least for my own financial lessons that I've learned, I do not invest in any instrument, any security that I do not fully understand and
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of risk tolerance for. So, like, I don't like to invest in cryptocurrencies, for example. It's just not something that um, I have a comfort level with. The blockchain itself, the concept of having a ledger, uh, without getting into a lot of detail, is the concept of having a unique identifier for transactions. And it can be used theoretically to match a buyer and a seller on a trade almost instantaneously. So in the loan market today, people take 2 to 3 weeks sometimes to settle very large transactions, and they're still doing it in a really old fashioned way, faxing things,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
sending sending 9 decimal places out to each other in a fax. And it's time to move past all of that, and I think using blockchain can greatly accelerate how those trades are settled. So the company I was referencing that I'm involved in, they're using that ledger technology to do that, but it's not something that I am a technical expert in at all.
So are they using that technology then to match borrowers and lenders then?
Not quite.
Or
So it would be the buyer and seller of a large loan. So the
okay, okay.
example would be if Bank ABC decides to originate a $100 million loan, they probably don't want to hold that whole thing on their balance sheet.
Right.
They need to syndicate it, which is just selling pieces of it to other financial institutions. There's also
Interesting.
for private credit, the space in private credit specifically, so non-banks. They also often sub-allocate positions and loans among sometimes it could even be 100 different entities that they actually use to spread the risk around. So there could be a big asset manager, and then they might have some, LPs or something, and they're also needing to, instead of executing 100 different trades, it'd be much better for them to execute one master trade ticket that then is kind of instantaneously settled among all of the sub allocations. So some of those kind of practical considerations are I think driving a lot of technology adoption.
For sure.
So
Makes sense.
digitizing, using smart contracts, and then using blockchain to basically match buyers and sellers. And then it also helps you to track something, right? So
Sure.
very similar to what happened in the bond world with Trace, if that's probably people may not be familiar with that on this, but we've seen a similar type of change in using technology in other parts of the capital markets. So this is kind of the last big space left, I think, that really could use it.
Yeah. Interesting. So, I mean, I made the comment about, for in order to work your way towards financial independence, you need to know some basics. You don't have to know all of the details of what's available in the finance world if you understand the basics. And if you practice those, right, if you have good habits around that and you're consistent and disciplined, you can still reach financial independence. That being said, if it's something that speaks to you, there is a huge amount of depth within the financial world and finances and the economy to explore if
Yeah.
you want to go down all kinds of different rabbit holes. So I just think it's again back to there's just opportunities for people, and it just depends sort of what lights you up or not. So
Oh, yeah. I think the best thing for people is to, when it comes to investing specifically, like my best advice for people is to know themselves. Like
yes.
that's the really important piece, right? Know your own risk tolerance. I've learned that so many different times myself, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is an interesting example specifically because I'm an investor in that company, and that was the first time I invested in like a startup, and I've learned so many things doing that about myself. Yeah, and just have found that to be true a lot. Like if you invest in something, you have to understand your time horizon and really understand your risk tolerance. Those are the main components. But you have to really, and because it's easy to talk about theoretically, but as you walk through your life and you get into these different phases, and you really do test that out to
Yeah.
find out your true risk tolerance, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
sure. I mean, especially if you want to explore other options, and because some people don't have any interest in doing that, right? Their risk tolerance
Yeah.
might be pretty low, and it's like, nope, I'm just going to do my 401k. I'm going to max that out, and I'll put some extra investments in. I'm going to do the stock market. I'm going to do a whole market fund. I've read some stuff about that, and I'm just going to do that for the long haul. And you know what? You can do that and reach financial independence and
Oh,
reach
yeah.
it before traditional retirement age. And that's a perfectly valid approach.
Yes, it
Or
is.
you can be like, I actually kind of like this stuff, and I'm going to explore this and I'm going to explore that. And you learn about whatever you want to learn about. And that's where you get into what you're talking about. And also, right, then you're continuing to learn other parts about yourself so that if you've got some level of risk tolerance, because some people it's very low, it's like they don't want to explore that stuff. Other
Yeah.
people, it's like, well, okay, or like entrepreneurs, right? We have high risk tolerance. Otherwise, you don't decide to go start up a thing on your own. Like you just, right? Because
Yeah.
that's, you're out there. But, but I think it's super important what you're saying, knowing yourself, because, I did that restaurant and it ended up sort of failing financially for, part of it was my issue. Part of it was things that happened with the economy. But I would, and I've said this all along, if someone asked me, well, if you were able to go back in time and do it again, knowing the outcome was going to be the same, would you do it? Yep, in a heartbeat. Because I had
Sure.
wanted to do it since I was 17, and I loved every minute of it. It was an absurd amount of work, but man, I was firing on all cylinders and it was great. But you have to know yourself, right? Not everybody would want to do that, but I did, and it was great. I wouldn't give that experience up for anything.
Yeah, I'm a big calculated risk taker. Like I get very antsy about putting all my eggs into any one basket. So
Sure.
I'm more of a barbell approach. I like to have most of what I'm doing is in very safe, things like index funds, Berkshire Hathaway, things like that. These kind of side quests, are pretty defined. They have a lot of sideboards around them. And I understand what you're saying. I have started a business before too that didn't go where I thought it would. It ended up going somewhere very different than I ever thought. But it's like you learn a lot through doing that. And I think with AI coming and all of the changes in the future, I think all our kids are really well served by understanding entrepreneurship because it's going to be a really important path, I think, in the future.
So let's talk about that before we wrap up. Let's talk about financial literacy for kids, just in terms of in our communities and as a society. Where do you think we're lacking? What do you see sort of happening? Like you just mentioned the AI piece. What do you see happening that sets us up for our kids to be in better positions? And what can parents do to help facilitate and move their kids towards that end?
Yeah, I kind of look at it maybe through a historical lens a little bit, but I sort of look at it like we have this superpower now that humans never have. We have basically all of the knowledge that we can track, at least digitally, right? Kind of at our fingertips. And so, on the one hand, we have this tremendous tool, but on the other hand, we've got algorithms that are working on engagement. We have everything kind of coming at you as a consumer. That's just this huge onslaught of trying to provoke your own psychology against you a little bit when it
Yeah.
comes to making decisions. So it's
Mhm.
like, it's this insane world to be a parent. Like, it's, I think, really important to try to give your kids the tools to navigate all of it. And I think the main thing to me is making it so money's not scary. Like, I think
Yeah.
the worst thing is if money's just this big, scary thing. And if it becomes, of course, when things happen to you or you're going through things, things are emotional. But when money just becomes totally emotional for people and they're not able to see their way through it, like that to me is the biggest thing to try to avoid with kids. I just really want them to demystify some of the concepts and make sure they have the tools, and yeah, help them understand, hey, look, you can access the whole world through the computer, but you need to be discerning and start to think about filtering through information, getting to the truth, and what your objectives are going in. Sorry, that's kind of a long-winded answer. I
No, no,
have very mixed feelings about,
well,
where
it's
we're at.
no, it's super tricky, right? Because it's such a good point. There's so much information out there, and you can go learn anything you want to learn, right? There are all sorts of videos on YouTube and all sorts of websites, and there's things you can read, but there are all these sites. And this has always been the case. It's just more now, right? Where businesses are trying to convince you, hey, you need this and you need to buy that and you need to, all these things. And that's where you were talking about, well, sort of trying to provoke our psychology to work against us a little bit, right? If you're trying to move towards FI and knowing what you value, do you really need that new coat or a new car? Or do you need that boat? Do you need another pair of shoes? Maybe, but maybe not. Right. And then there's the whole thing of there's just a ton of misinformation out there.
Yeah.
And again, I think that's always been there. It's just so much more prevalent now, and it's popped up in front of you all the time. It's much more difficult to avoid. And so then you've got to have some way as an adult, and then obviously try to figure out how to help teach your kids, okay, this is something they're going to be dealing with. What's the
Yeah.
mechanism? What are the principles that I need to teach them to help to differentiate what's seems like it's good information and what's nah, maybe not such good information. And
Yeah.
that to me is an extremely important skill. We talk about that in our house a lot, right? We have two teenagers, like how, and we talk about it with them. And, some of it they're interested in, and some of it they're like, yeah, yeah. I mean, but again,
Yeah.
that's planting that seed part, but trying to figure out how to help them work out how you differentiate good information versus shady information.
Yeah, or even just like one thing that I try to do in our house. We don't always do this, but like when it makes sense, I try to introduce a little bit of friction into the process. So like if I find something on Amazon, that's a good example that I think I really just want something on Amazon. It's
Mm-hmm.
just an easy example. We have, a 3 day kind of a rule of thumb that I've taught my kids where, we don't actually, if it's a want and not a need, we'll put it on a spreadsheet. And then in 3 days, we're going to come back and revisit if we still feel the same way that we just really need that thing. Even now, like if you check out online, like I am amazed at the creativity. There are these, all these weird little loans now that are these new loans that suddenly have appeared and they're all the same just different versions of the same concept, right? But there's so much that people are trying to make it very, very easy as a consumer, and I'm trying to teach my kids how to add friction into that process or how to get some space for themselves so they can have a second to think about things. That's kind of what I mean by that.
No, I think that's actually a great suggestion. And I think, some of us do those things sometimes. And sometimes we think of it, and sometimes you still kind of find yourself getting sort of
Oh
sucked
yeah.
in. Oh, this is this great deal. I'm going to jump on it now. But teaching your kids that early, I think, is great advice because then you just that, well, stop and think. Doesn't mean you can't still get it, but, that's a great habit to start to instill. And they won't always follow it, but hopefully they'll follow it more often than not. So that's actually great advice. I really like that.
That's one little thing that we do. And then I do try to be very open with my kids about the family budget. I think everyone's got to navigate that differently as a parent, but I do try to, because they'll ask me questions, like especially if there's something that they're worried about or it kind of comes out of nowhere, then they'll ask me a question and I'll just say, well, why don't you come look at the budget with me? I don't use, everyone's different. Some people use software, some people have an app. I'm very old fashioned, maybe. I just use a spreadsheet. It's just a spreadsheet that I made that is kind of customized for what I thought we should focus on. But
Yep.
I'll just invite them over. Hey, come look at the spreadsheet. Do you want to see our portfolio? I'll say, like, hey, do you want to see what mommy is investing in and why? I just try to like demystify it because I don't want it to be this big mystery. I really don't want that. I want them to just look at it like a practical thing, like it's a tool, something they need to master. Shouldn't be something scary. If you're doing it right, it should be, kind of an important thing that you don't lose sight of, but not the main thing that you're focused on. So,
Yeah. Well, and again, so important to talk about it. And kind of this takes us back to where you started in a sense, right? Is that, you mentioned you've always been drawn to these things that are, not maybe polite sort of conversation
yeah.
pieces. But I think with money, that's a habit that hasn't really served us well, right? Why not talk about money? I was listening to something else, I don't know, this is a few weeks ago, and I think it was Scott Galloway, and he was saying on that podcast, he goes, you know the thing is rich people talk about money all the time, right? They're always talking about, oh, what are you investing in, or what are you this, and what are you blah blah blah. And it's like, so this idea that people aren't talking about money, right? That's like something we need to get over. And I completely agree. So, so bringing them in, and you're right, right? So depending on the particular circumstances in any given family and their dynamic, they may be comfortable sort of bringing their kids in as much as you are. They may want to be like, well, that's a little too much, but still talking about it in whatever way is comfortable for that family, I think is so important, so that at least on some level, their kids are comfortable talking about it. They're starting to think about it from an early age because it just sets them up so much better when then they go off into adulthood.
Yeah, I think so. And I even think for adults, it's never too late. Even just practical things, but The city budget, the city has a $250 million budget. It is, we're not the same small city that we used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it when citizens review the budget, when they give suggestions, when they go through it. I think that's great. Like the more eyes on it, the better is kind of my attitude about these things. Like, we're a very fiscally focused city, and I just want to make sure people, yeah, have the tools for their own personal life and have the tools to evaluate their local government, things they're thinking about. It's all really practical. It's never too late though. Like I think you can always pick up a book at the library as just a little starting point. There are a lot of classics, right? Simple Path to Well, I mean, all
Yep.
there's just so many different choices, but really good, just like practical starting points of the concepts, and then you can kind of go from there. But yeah, I think it's for all ages. Like I really do believe it should be accessible to everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I
Thanks
know
for doing
you've
this
got to.
podcast. Thanks for doing this
Oh,
podcast.
well, yeah. Well, and that was kind of the thing that inspired me to do it as I was working on my journey towards FI and, had gotten to a point where like, okay, I'd really sort of stepped back and I've been sort of on a long mini retirement for a while. And in talking to people about FI, talking to people about money, I just kept saying, man, I wish I would have known this stuff when I was younger. And then finally it clicked like, well, okay, then why don't you? And I had this idea of, well, I'd kind of like to do a podcast, but I wasn't sure what. And then finally the two came together. And so, yeah, so it's been fun so far. And again, right, it's different, but similar to what I was saying about you, like being able to talk to and come into contact with a lot of different people in your role as a city council member. It's similar on my end, right? Having conversations with people like you and the people from the Singleton Foundation and all sorts of other people, having guests on the podcast is hopefully useful for people, but it's certainly fun and cool for me just to have cool conversations. Anyway,
that's great.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, because I know you've got to go, any final thoughts?
No, I mean, not really. I think the main thing I would say is just, yeah, I think everyone is learning as they go. I mean, parenting, they don't come with a manual,
Mm-hmm.
You need to chart your course as a parent, but I am very encouraged at all of the new tools available. I mentioned some of them. I even think AI is a great tool when
Sure.
it comes to teaching your kids. You need to use it carefully and thoughtfully, and it's not without its, things that you need to watch out for, but we've been able to use it a lot in these conversations. Just the other day, I've been blown away. I was asking Chat GTP, I need to cover the Industrial Revolution, but I want to pull in physical science too. How can I cover both of those things? And it actually was able to give me some suggestions, So if you can
cool.
create a unit study curriculum in 5 seconds that marries together completely different topics that you don't necessarily know if they go together, I promise you can find some really good advice and tools about personal finance as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot out there. So yeah, it's exciting.
Well, thank you so much, Liz, for coming on. I think it was a fun conversation. I hope useful for people. I think you had lots of great advice. So thank you so much.
And thank you. And I'll keep watching your podcast so I can keep getting the good advice because I definitely personally appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks you.
All right. Thanks, Dominic.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the FI for Kids podcast. Please support the show by hitting subscribe and receive new episodes every Thursday. The intro and exit music this episode are courtesy of Douglas Cameron. As always, you can find links to the FI for Kids music in the show notes. Thanks again, and we'll talk next week.
You're about the horizon. I can't reach you, you're so far away. And if I run to the place I want you to stay, you'd be gone. I've been left wondering why you moved on, and why you never said goodbye. I can't wait any longer. I see the writing on the wall. It's time for us to say Tomorrow we are yesterday. You're like the sunset. You're glowing bright.